This is the key to 14.5 Part C, and again, you're solving rational equations. So remember, a rational equation is an equation that contains rational expressions. And so notice in this case, you have 3 rational expressions. And when solving a rational equation, the first thing you have to do is make sure you factor the denominators. So if you look at the first denominator, that's an x. I can't do anything with that. X minus 5, I can't factor. Over here, x squared minus 5x, if I look at this, the GCF is x, right? So it becomes x times x minus 5. All right, so those are your factors. So you factor the denominator. The next thing you want to do is before we find the LCD, let's talk about the restriction. So remember, restriction is a number so that when you substitute that number into the variable, you don't want it to be 0 because 0 in the denominator makes this thing undefined. So remember, you can never divide by 0. So that's what we call those restrictions. So if I look at the first denominator, that x, when is x equal to 0? Well, when x is 0. So that's one of my restrictions. Here, x minus 5, when is x minus 5 equal to 0? When x is what? When x is 5. So there's another restriction. Over here, your next factor is x. I already dealt with it. My next factor is x minus 5. I already dealt with it. So how many restrictions do you have? 2, 0, and 5. Now your LCD must include every factor that you see, because the whole point of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be factors of 1s. Okay, so I see an x, so I must use it. It has to be in the LCD. That's the only way I can get a factor 1 is for this to be in here. In the next one, x minus 5, I don't see it, so I must use them. Put that in parentheses. Because remember, your LCD is a product of all your factors. Product of all your factors. The next factor I see is an x. I already have it listed. The next factor is x minus 5. I already have it listed. Only listed once. If you list those again, you're making this whole situation much more difficult, and you're not going to be able to succeed with this. So only listed once. You're finding the least. That's why you call it the least. Okay, so that's your least. Now, once you find your least common denominator, now remember the next step is to multiply both sides by the least common denominator so that you can clear those fractions. So clearing the fractions means that you want those denominators to be factors of 1s. So notice when we do this, you're going to see I'm going to put a 1, a 1, a 1. All right, you're going to see why. Okay, now remember in the previous worksheets and lessons, so since there are 2 rational expressions here, let's put that in parentheses. So 3 over x minus 4 divided by x minus 5. And then since that's just one rational expression, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to put that in parentheses, but it's important that you don't use x squared minus 5x. It's important that you use the factored part, the factored form. So equal 2 divided by x times x plus 5. Okay, now we're going to multiply both sides by the least common denominator. So I'm going to say x times x minus 5, just like this, times x minus 5, just like that, right? So that should be minus 5, right? All right, minus 5. Okay, now before you reduce, remember, don't reduce, because then you're going to be distributing only the x minus 5, and that's not correct. You got to distribute this whole thing. So distribute first, and then reduce. So the LCD times the first rational expression minus the LCD times the second rational expression equals, and then I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this over. Whatever I see. Okay, so this times the LCD. Now let's reduce. Let's reduce. So we reduce, these x's divide out. Remember, the whole point of multiplying with the LCD is to clear those denominators. So meaning that you want 1s as factors. So now I have a 1. So if I wanted this to be a 1, then this denominator better be in the LCD, and it is. This denominator better be in the LCD, and it is. This denominator better be in the LCD, and it is. See, I have 1s now. And so now I have 3 times x minus 5 times 1, which is 3 times x minus 5. Okay. And then here I have x times 1 times 4 is minus 4x equal. And then here I have 2 times 1 is 2. So notice I went from a rational equation to a linear equation. This is linear. And so I'm going to distribute. So I get 3x minus 15 minus 4x equal 2, right? Combine like terms, I get negative x. 3x and a negative 4x is negative x. Minus 15 equal 2. I'm just going to go right here. And then let me rewrite this over. Okay, adding 15 to both sides, I get negative x equals 17, right? And then remember, I'm trying to get x by itself. This is a negative x, so I've got to divide by negative 1. And the negative 1's divide out, so you get x to be a negative 17. Negative 17. Okay? So, if I, and remember at this point, that's where you look and see if that's one of your restrictions. Is negative 17 one of the restrictions? No. Okay? So that's not one of my restrictions. So if I did all this work correct, then negative 17 should work. All right, now what you may want to do now is check. So let's just check this. So we're going to check negative 17. All right, let's just check and see if x equals negative 16 works. Go back to the original. So here's the original. 3 divided by x minus 4 divided by x minus 5 equal 2 divided by x squared minus 5x. Okay? So 3, so wherever we see the variable x, I'm going to substitute negative 17. So 3 divided by negative 17 minus 4 divided by negative 17 minus 5, right? Equal 2 divided by, that's what I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find those two sides are equal 2 divided by negative 17 squared minus 5 times negative 17. Okay? All right, so this right here becomes negative 3 over 17, right? Over here, that's going to be minus 4 divided by, what's negative 17 and negative 5? Well, that's going to be a negative 22, right? And then over here, that's going to be 2 divided by, use a calculator with this part. So in parentheses, negative 17 squared, right? Minus 5 times, in parentheses, negative 17, I get 324. So this denominator is 324. So make sure that's what you get. Now let's go back over here. Let's use our calculator. Negative 3 divided by 17 minus 4 divided by negative 22. See that? Press equal, and I get this rational number. Okay, now notice it doesn't terminate, so let's go back and convert it to a decimal. So hopefully I'm going to get, hopefully this is this. So let's go back and convert that. So you press second PRB, see fraction to decimal, decimal to fraction. Just press equal, get 1 over 187. That's what this is, right? Because if I reduce this reduced is what? 2 and a 2 is 1. What's 324 divided by 2? Ooh, 162. Okay, so let's see if I made a mistake. So I probably made a mistake somewhere. Let me make sure. Negative 17. That's correct. Let me go back right here. So 2 divided by negative 17 squared. Oops, let me do this first. Let me do the denominator. So negative 17 squared minus 5 times negative 17. Oh, 374. Okay, I get 374. Let me make sure this is right. Is that right? I'm just checking real quick. Okay, so let's do 2 divided by 374. So 374 divided by 2 equals, okay, 187. So that's 187 now. So yeah, it's correct. So somehow when I put this in a calculator, I messed up. So that's why it's important that you check, because if you looked at this, you'd say, oh, I did something wrong, and so this is not correct. X equals negative 7 is not correct, and it is. It's just that when see, this looks pretty complicated. So, and even when using a calculator, you can mess up just like I just did. So always check again. Always put it back in your calculator and see if maybe you messed up, and I did. So this should have been 374. Okay, so that was number 1. All right, number 2. So, and number 2, and I may need more room, so I may have to go back to another sheet of paper. But again, just like in number 1, you're gonna factor your denominators. So this is already, I can't factor this. This I can. So let's factor this. It'll be x 4 2 plus plus, and this I can't factor. All right, so let's talk about the restrictions. So every factor you see, you got to ask yourself, what makes that denominator 0? Okay, so that's how you get your restrictions. So x plus 2 is equal to 0 when x equal -2. So that's one of my restrictions. Let's go to the next one. X plus 4. X plus 4 is equal to 0 when x equal -4, right? -4. X plus 2, I already dealt with it. I already found the restriction. X plus 4, I already found the restriction. So I only have 2 restrictions. Now we got to find the LCD. So the LCD has to include every factor you see. You got to look at all your rational expressions and look at the denominators. I see an x plus 2 as a factor, I must use it. Put in parentheses. I see an x plus 4 as a factor, I don't see it here, I must use it. I'll go to my next one. X plus 2, I already have it listed. Don't list it again. List it once. X plus 4, I already have it listed. So there's your LCD. Okay? Then the next step is to multiply both sides of this rational equation by the LCD so that you can clear those denominators. So you can get ones in their place. Because remember, the whole point is to go from something that looks complicated to something that looks simple. Okay? So that's why we clear the fractions. Okay, so I'm going to, since this has 2 rational expressions, put that in parentheses. So I'm going to say 1 divided by x plus 2 plus x minus 1 divided by, now put that in factored form, x plus 4 times x plus 2 equal, and then 1 divided by x plus 4. I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So x plus 2 times x plus 4, x plus 2 times x plus 4. Okay? Now I'm going to reduce. I'm going to distribute. So I get the LCD times the first rational expression, just like this, plus the LCD times the second rational expression, okay, just like this. And we're just going to put that in parentheses. Equal. Now, since I'm running out of room, I'm just going to go ahead and reduce. Oh, let me go ahead and write it over. I'm going to go ahead, because I still have room. So it'll be 1 over x plus 4 times x plus 2 times x plus 4. Okay, now I'm going to reduce. So reduce, remember the whole point of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s. And the LCD must include it, and it does. So I'm left with 1 times x plus 4 times 1 is x plus 4. Plus, here, the x, remember the, so instead of writing this, we wrote this, right? The reason why we did the factored form is because the LCD is already factored, is listed as factors. So x plus 4 is divide out, x plus 2 is divide out, and so what's 1 times x minus 1? It's x minus 1. Equal. The x plus 4 is divide out, and you're left with 1 times x plus 2 is x plus 2. Okay? So notice I have this linear equation now. So to solve this linear equation, what I'm going to do first is combine like terms over here. So x plus x is 2x. 4 and a negative 1 is a positive 3 equal x plus 2. All right, so to solve a rational, to solve a linear equation, bring all variables to one side, constant to the other. So I get subtract x. So I get x plus 3 equal 2. Subtract 3 from both sides. I get x to be negative 1. All right, now once you get to that point, negative 1 is a solution to the linear, but it may not be a solution to the rational. So that's why you have to look at the restrictions. Is negative 1 a restriction? No. So if I did all this work correct, then negative 1 should be a solution. All right, and then let's just go ahead and check. We have time, so let's just check this. Let me just show you what to do if you want to check it. So if you want to check, this is number 2. We're checking x equal negative 1. So you must go back to the original. So here is the original. This is the original. All right, so, and remember, always use the original. Don't use the factored part because you could have messed up when you factored. Okay, so wherever we see the variable x, I'm going to substitute -1. So I get 1 divided by -1 plus 2 plus -1 minus 1 divided by -1 squared plus 6 times -1 plus 8. Okay, wherever we see the variable x, I substitute -1. And I want to see if that's going to equal to 1 divided by -1 plus 4. All right, now, some of these I can do very easily, so without using a calculator, like this is 1 over -1 plus 2 is 1. Plus a -1 and a -1 is a -2. Now, for some of you, may need to use your calculator here, but that's just -1, so that's going to be easy to deal with. -1 times itself is 1. 6 times a -1 is a -6, right? So what's 1 plus a -6? Well, that's a -5. -5 plus 8 is a +3. And over here, I get 1 divided by -1 plus 4 is a +3. So let's use a calculator on this and see if we get 1/3. So 1 divided by 1 is 1, right? So 1 plus a -2 divided by 3 equals, and then if you don't know that this is 1/3, remember 0.3 repeating is 1/3. If you didn't, just say second PRB, convert it to a fraction, get 1/3. And that's what we had here. So x equal -1 is the solution. All right? Now number 3, let's look at number 3. So number 3, again, do the same that we did before. You're going to factor. So the only thing I can factor here is x squared minus 1. So that's the difference of two squares. So x minus 1, x plus 1, right? And and this is just 1. So the denominator does not include any variables, so I don't have to worry about factoring. Okay, so let's find the restrictions. So what makes this denominator 0? So what makes x minus 1 equal to 0 when x is 1? Okay, go here. This factor is x minus 1. What makes that 0? I already found it. It's 1. What makes x plus 1 0? Well, let's see. -1, right? And here I don't have any variables in the denominator, so I'm done. So those are my two restrictions. Now let's cover the LCD. The LCD must include every factor you see in the denominator. I see an x minus 1, I must use it. The next one's x minus 1, I already have it listed. The next one's x plus 1, I must use it. And then here, that denominator is a 1, and 1's a factor of everything. So I'm going to not worry about that 1. That's your LCD. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, since the left side has two rational expressions, put that in parentheses, and we're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. That's the only way I can clear the fractions. So I get 2x divided by x minus 1 plus x minus 5 divided by x minus 1 times x plus 1 in parentheses equals 1, right? Okay, now I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So times x minus 1 times x minus 1 times x minus 1 times x plus 1. That should be plus 1 right here. Okay, so now we're going to distribute. And so I get the LCD times the first fraction plus the LCD times the second fraction. Okay. Oops. And then equal, and then 1 times this. I'm just going to go ahead and write what I see. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and reduce. So if I reduce, the x minus 1's divide out. All right, now be careful. This is going to be a little bit more complicated than the other two. So I get 2x times x plus 1, because that's 1 times x plus 1 times 2x is 2x times x plus 1. Plus the x minus 1's divide out, the x plus 1's divide out, and you get 1 times x minus 5 is x minus 5. Equal. Now over here, you got to be careful. So remember, you're multiplying two binomials, so we have to use the FOIL here. So that's going to be the FOIL. Okay? So x times x is x squared. The outer is a positive x, the inner is a negative x, so those cancel out. You get 0. A -1 times 1 is a -1. All right, so that's what I get. Okay? Now, distribute. I get 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 1 is 2x plus 5 plus x. minus 5 equal x squared minus 1. Now I want you to notice is that in the previous two that we did y'all see that I went from a rational equation to a linear? I went from a rational equation to a linear. Here I'm going from a rational equation to a quadratic. Okay, to a quadratic. Okay, so let's combine like terms. I get 2x squared. 2x and x is 3x minus 5 equal x squared minus 1. All right, so to solve a quadratic equation, you got to bring all the terms to one side. You got to put in the standard form. So let's subtract x squared from both sides. So 2x squared minus x squared is x squared plus 3x minus 5 equal, this is 0. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Then we have to add 1 to both sides now. And so I get x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. Now remember, the only way you know how to solve a quadratic equation is by factoring. Now these are factorable that you're going to deal with. They are factorable. So let's go ahead and factor this. And we're going to use the zero factor property. So x for 1 plus minus. So if I check, this is going to be this. Now we're going to use the zero factor property. So I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. And then notice I went from a rational equation to a quadratic equation to two linear equations. So I'm going to subtract 4. So I get x to be negative 4. I'm going to add 1. So I get x to be positive 1. All right, now once you get to that point, you got to look to see if any of those are restrictions, because you can't say both of them are solutions. Because look, what are your restrictions? 1, negative 1. But what do you see here? A 1. So I can't use that. That's a restriction. So the only one I can use is this negative 4. So that's the only solution. Now, assuming I did all this work correctly, then that should be correct. Okay? So let's just check it. So let's go back and let's just check this. Let's go to another sheet of paper to check this. So when we check this, go back to the original. So we're checking x equal negative 4. So this is number 3. So we're checking. So we have 2x divided by, this is going to rewrite the original, 2x divided by x minus 1 plus x minus 5 divided by x squared minus 1. And I'm going to see that's going to equal 1. So that's the original. So where we see the variable x, I'm going to substitute negative 4. So I get 2 times negative 4 divided by negative 4 minus 1 plus negative 4 minus 5 divided by negative 4 squared in parentheses minus 1. And I want to see if that left side, which looks messy, is going to equal a positive 1. Well, what's 2 times a negative 1? Let's do as much as this without a calculator as possible. What's 2 times a negative 4? That's a negative 8. What's a negative 4 and a negative 1? That's a negative 5, right? Plus, what's a negative 4 and a negative 5? Well, that's a negative 9. What's a negative 4 squared? Positive 16. And what's 16 minus 1? 15. And I want to see if that's going to equal a 1. Now, use your calculator on this part. Now, look, a negative divided by negative is a positive. So I'm just going to say 8/5. So 8 divided by 5 plus a negative 9 divided by 15 equal 1. And then 1 equals 1. Okay? So x equal negative 4 is the solution. Okay, so number 3 was complicated. Look how complicated it was, and we could have easily messed up anywhere along the process. So it's very important you go back and do the same problem without looking at the work. And just keep in mind that when you get to your solutions that you think are solutions, you've got to check them because some of these may be restrictions. Okay? Because remember, you cannot divide by 0. So if I went back and I looked at negative 1 and see why positive 1, and see why positive 1 doesn't work is because of this. What's 1 plus 1 minus 1? 0. And so I can't have 2 times 1 is 2. So I can't have 2 divided by 0 because that's undefined. Okay? So always look for your restrictions when you're solving rational equations. So that's the key to 14.5 Part C. And solving rational equations is not an easy skill to do for some students. But if you keep practicing with this, it does get better.